Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome. This is a special meeting of the Kent School District Board, which is held in public to comply with the Open Public Meetings Act. The purpose of this meeting is a work session to discuss the Superintendent 2022-2023 Annual Plan and Evaluation with Dr. Larry Nyland, as well as a discussion on the Kent School District boundary change recommendations with Dr. Wade Behringer. Tonight, President Hamada is excused from this meeting, and Dr. Jewel Harmon, Chief Accountability Officer, Ms. Simone Hamilton, Director of Equity and Strategic Engagement, Ms. Naomi Zantello, School Board Executive Assistant, and Dr. Larry Nyland will be attending the meeting via Zoom. Full house on Zoom tonight. We will now proceed to the roll call. For attendance, I will call each board member's name, and if they're present, of course, they'll say present or here or something else. So obviously, I'm here. Director Farah?
Present.
Director Clark?
Present.
Director Margell?
Present.
And of course, President Hamada is excused. We will now move to 2.01, Superintendent 2022 through 2023 Annual Plan and Evaluation. And I will call upon Superintendent Vela for introductions.
Thank you, Vice President Benno and members of the board. I'd like to formally introduce Dr. Larry Nyland, who, as Vice President Benno mentioned, is attending remotely on Zoom today with the rest of our team, which he will introduce once I introduce him. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Nyland, who will start our presentation.
Good evening. And I'm going to rely on Spencer Pan, I believe, to bring up the PowerPoint. Excuse me, my voice is not working really well right now. I have a cold, so it's good that I'm here and you're there. So let's see if we can get our
Yes.
PowerPoint to come up here.
Yeah, Dr. Nyland, we'll get that up here just shortly. Sorry about that.
All right. Well, we've been on quite a journey together, and we've made great progress. So tonight we're doing the first reading for the adjusted superintendent evaluation document, and anticipating that there'll be a second reading and an adoption at a board meeting next week. So I'm going to give a very brief recap, and then we'll have time for discussion here. I'm going to go to the next slide. Great. So we've got the two pieces that we've been working on are trying to figure out how to align all of our arrows. And these two diagrams represent the complexity of Kent School District. 2,000, 3,000, more than 3,000 staff members. I don't know how many classrooms, thousands, and dozens of schools, and trying to get all of those arrows lined up so that they result in great student learning. And the diagram on the right is showing that the board does that work with the superintendent, the district staff, the schools, and the community. And when we're all working together, we can make good things happen. So my mantra has been 4 years, 4 goals, student success. We can kind of keep our eye on the ball and keep moving in the right direction. So with that in mind, the next slide says this has been our journey. From June 7th up until today, October 19th, we started by reviewing successes and opportunities, and then completed the evaluation process for the interim superintendent. I've continued to do work study sessions on what the superintendent evaluation rating scale should look like. The board gave several suggestions for how we should modify that, which we've done. A lot of good discussion turning the opportunities into goal statements, and then most recently, kind of doing a first reading tonight because we added in the progress indicators that the board had asked for. So we're doing a great job. You're doing a great job of collaborating and working together to get our North Star adjusted just right and moving forward. So next slide. So that's where we are right now, is we have one very long document which has two parts to it. The first part is the standards, and it reads, many of you may not have seen that, but it reads very much like a teacher evaluation or a principal evaluation in Washington, with a 4-part rating scale and several research-based standards. And then the second part of the document are the district improvement goals that parallel very much the standards. So that's where we are right now, is anticipating that we'd have a first reading, any final adjustments to that, and then an adoption of that at the next board meeting on the 26th. And that would fulfill the requirements of the superintendent's contract, that the evaluation process be in place. Last meeting, you postponed that from the 15th of October to the 26th of October. So that's kind of a pause in our breath, and then I want to shift a little bit to the next slide to say, what did we hear from the board last time? Well, we heard that the document is really long, so there will be a kind of a cover sheet rating form that will pull it all together. But you asked, which parts are most important, and then several of you have raised the issue of, we'd really like to see actual, measurable. We agree for that staff because of the collaboration piece that needs to include district staff and in some cases school staff to make all of that happen. So we're proposing that we bring that to you for the retreat, which is scheduled for October 28th. And with that, I'm going to introduce Spencer Pan, and he's going to talk a little bit about the work that the DARTS team does and how the goals impact what happens in the district.
Thank you. And with me is Joelle Marano, who is our Director of Strategic Initiatives, and will help guide you through this slide. And so, Joelle will start first.
Good evening, Vice President Benno, members of the board, Superintendent Vella, and Ms. Santello. So yes, as it was mentioned, part of our work around data is to ensure that we have processes and systems that enable KSD personnel to monitor how we're moving forward with actualizing the strategic goals and initiatives. And our supports also include that feedback loop of where our efforts and resources can be targeted to maximize that positive impact. So big picture, we track and measure data from numerous sources and systems. And one of the ways we share that with staff is through data dashboards in a system called Vision. Now, as we consider next steps with the superintendent's evaluation, it'll be important to consider a few concepts related to indicators, really centered around the strategies that our teams are engaged in and ultimately how that work will be measured. So you see in this image the strategic goals and the superintendent's goals. There's a relationship between those and these two types of indicators, progress and performance. In terms of what we measure, there may be aspects of progress and aspects of performance that are of particular importance to the board and superintendent. Thinking about progress indicators, those would be those items that speak to implementation fidelity. Essentially, do we have a plan? What is the degree to which that plan has been implemented in alignment with how it's designed? Performance indicators would be those items that speak to the impact of implementation and help inform where strategies can continue and where they can shift for continuous improvement. So essentially, what is the impact of our plan, and are we seeing the impact that we had anticipated? So monitoring implementation fidelity, or our progress indicator, will ensure we can clearly identify the strategy's impact on our district performance. So I'm going to turn it back over to my friend Spencer Pan to talk about the relationship between strategies and indicators with a specific example for K-3 literacy.
Thank you. And I think this visual is a good and simple representation that can help guide, especially with the terminology as we're using it, in the documents that you already have. So an example that we might utilize is thinking about what we've labeled as a goal, right? There's both, in the documents, a board goal and a superintendent goal. So we might have, for example, prepare all students to be college and career ready. That's a goal. We also have simultaneously supporting the whole child. That's also indicated as a goal. How we go about measuring, are we succeeding in that goal, right, is one of the questions I think is pertinent to being answered. The way we would measure that is a performance indicator. So the selection of that performance indicator in this example might be, I'll give two kind of examples, right? One of them would be reading at grade level by third grade. Right? That's a common indicator that we would track regardless of the specific strategies that we are employing to try to achieve that goal. Another might be we are seeking a specific 4-year graduation rate to achieve. Right? So that might be another key performance indicator. I think the value is in the word key, right? It's not an exhaustive list of all these different indicators, but what do we believe is most closely aligned and powerful in representing, did we achieve this goal? Separate of that are what you'll see in the pack of information you have and what the board has been working through, this concept of the progress indicator. Right, so this progress indicator, really if you think about those items, are items that are captured in a project plan. There's things that have, if we do these things on these timelines, we can measure implementation fidelity. Right? The measure of implementation fidelity would be, did we actually do the things that we said we're going to do in the timeline that we said we're going to perform them on? The way we would check that is, what is the plan? Did we follow the plan? The separation between these two things is there are instances where you can do the implementation with fidelity, but it may or may not achieve the intended result, the intended outcome. And so the importance of discerning which measure we're looking at and the precision of which I think is the answer to this question around were we successful? Were we successful in doing the plan, or were we successful in achieving the intended outcome? So with that, I think we're done with this slide. And any other questions, or back to Dr. Nyland?
Quick question. We'll stop for some questions on this diagram since we have our experts. Right. I wanted just to also share that our DARTS team keeps a whole host of data. Not all that data is quantitative. There's some qualitative. Did we complete the plan? What's the implementation look like, so that we can see an impact on student learning. And so Mr. Pan just shared just an example, because that's the board did select K-3 literacy, math and literacy as one, and shared just that example. We use a whole host of assessment data points for that. And so I just wanted to share that, but I wanted to give them an opportunity as the experts to answer your questions at this time. So Vice President Benno, I'll turn it back to you.
Whoever has any questions. Director Perry, you had
I just want to know, as Superintendent Vela just said, which one is the quantitative and which one is the qualitative of the performance indicators and the progress indicators?
They both could be quantitative or qualitative, right? It's in the definition. Can we agree upon that definition? And then the way I talk about it often with our teams is, would we all agree on our achieving the thing at the end of it? So what are our criteria for success? So, what does a successful one look like?
Yeah. Can you give me another example of progress indicator?
Yes. So I think about these as, if we look in the educational sphere or in the general business sphere, right? We might look at a project plan. We say we have a plan, we seek to deliver a product.
Right.
Our plan captures all the steps and all the project deliverable timelines and says, we're going to push out this software by this date.
Right.
Did we do that? Did we achieve it in the timeline that we said we're going to do it? That's implementation fidelity.
Thank you.
If I may, Vice President Benno, give an additional one that's actually listed as our multi-tiered systems of support. I was out and you saw in my weekly I shared, I think it was a master schedule.
Right.
I think it was Jenkins Creek. That is a good example of looking at implementation of systems of support within a school that are set up to provide tiered 1, 2, and 3 types of interventions that are just in time. So implementation would be of the progress indicator. Do we have a systems of support? And then the latter, meaning performance indicator, are we seeing achievement, particularly around 3rd grade, being successful? So I just wanted to throw that other example. Sorry, thank you, Vice President.
No, that's great. Anybody have any other questions?
I just wanted to have, and I keep saying this, but if we can get a baseline of where we are now, would really help us so that we can later on look at it and see, whatever time period we decide, where we are from the baseline.
And to that question, to that statement,
Right.
Director Farah, I would say both of these would be fairly straightforward to do, right? Because the first, if we look at performance indicators, we're documenting those all the time, right? We monitor and track, like 3rd grade reading, for example, regardless of what strategies we're employing to do so, right? Irregardless of having a plan or not, this is a thing we are reporting on, that we are tracking, we are monitoring. So we have that for a long period of time, and we can establish what is that baseline, because we have a strong data set for that. For other indicators, we might not be able to do so if they were just new ones that were produced, but for certain things like graduation rate or achievement at 3rd grade, we have those things and we can go back in time for them. For plan fidelity, we also have those pursuant to specific plans. It depends a lot around what the specific strategy one is employing at the time, but for something like Superintendent Vela indicated, right, where a team is already working actively on a plan, we can ask for that plan, and we can say, where are we based on where we're expecting to be, right? The plan would outline dates of deliverables and intended span of time for the project. So at this point in time, where are we with said project? That would establish effectively the baseline of when that's starting and when that's intended to end.
In my senior class, we're talking about causation and correlational data, and just because we have reading scores doesn't mean that was a cause of something, right? So it could be definitely correlational things depending on what came first. So I'm assuming that in your progress indicators or in your performance indicators, you have some idea of what programs actually increase reading scores versus every school put in a new schedule and suddenly the reading scores were better. Oh, it was the schedules all along, which probably wasn't, right? So I'm assuming that you have certain ways of kind of looking at which data is more causational, which one is more correlational.
Vice President Benno,
Yeah.
I think yes, but at the same token, there's as things kind of spread out, right, especially at a district level, if we knew precisely these are the singular sources of strategies that would affect this change, it's a little more complex, as I think we can all say to that. If we knew precisely that these things were guaranteed to move this, then there would be no guesswork, right? There would be no deliberation around what strategies to apply. We have research and we have inferences we can draw that suggest that these are the right strategies, these are the right work to do. And if we implement those with fidelity, we can ascertain, was it for lack of implementation fidelity, or was it because we need to go back to the drawing board? And that process and that cycle really is the continuous improvement framework.
I love that data is in everyday life, and my students never believe me, and here's an example, I'll make them watch this. But anybody have any other questions?
Not this time.
We appreciate it, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Turn it back over to you, Dr. Nyland.
All right. Thank you so much. Great conversation. And we wish we'd had more time tonight because Darts has a great report on third grade reading and math where they've done exactly that. And they've identified what are some of the promising practices and how can we double down on some of those. So the next slide is homework for the board and for executive cabinet. So for the 28th, what we're asking is for all of us to think about what's going to have the most impact. I like Spencer's term key. What are the key indicators that we think will have the biggest impact? And some of those pertain to student learning, and some of them pertain to community and district improvement. So we'll be sending you again the long document and asking you to think about in advance of the retreat, what are 2 indicators in each of the 4 goals that you think have the most promise? And executive cabinet will be doing the same. And so we'll be trying to come to an agreement, collaboration, on the 28th around what you've just been discussing. It's kind of like, well, which ones do we think are more causal? And which ones do we think are really important for other reasons, important to our community and to each of us? So, last slide is the same one that is how do we collaborate with each other and get all of those arrows lined up and get all of the 3,000 plus staff members in Kent working in a common direction for the improvement of student learning. So it's been a journey. I appreciate it. We have more to do. For now, we're asking for the first reading and then the approval of the document as it exists now, recognizing that we still want to continue to collaborate and work together, drill down deeper on what are the strategies and indicators that are going to get us where we want to go.
And I just wanted to formally thank our board. I know we're missing one of our members, but all of us have been really involved, as you saw on the first couple of slides, on co-creating this, and we look forward, and I do look forward to us, our board approving the annual goals, which are listed on that form, which we came to an agreement on, in addition to the progress indicators that we're going to continue to dig deeper in there and really look at those data pieces that you mentioned, Director Farah, so that we can really look system-wide, which ones are going to have most impact on student learning, in particular for those of our most underrepresented student groups. And so if we continue to dive deeper, I look forward to our future conversations and look forward to our DARTS team to continue to share with us how we can look and use the right kind of data, as Vice President Beno mentioned. So just a thank you, and I look forward to the 26th for the board's approval and continued work.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Nyland or Superintendent?
I just want to get to know Dart's team very well.
That's it? Okay, we're done with this section. It sounds like we're ready to move on to the ever exciting 2.02 on the Kent School District boundary change recommendations with Dr. Wade Behringer and the rest of the team, or some members of the team.
Yeah, no, thank you, Vice President Beno. We're excited again, as we were last week, and continue to keep coming to you. Dr. Behringer will continue the next phase of our boundary pieces, and excited about sharing some of the work that the teams have been doing thus far and will continue to do. So, Dr. Behringer.
Great, thank you. Vice President Beno, members of the board, Superintendent Vella, Ms. Santello, thank you very much for the opportunity this evening. Looking forward to coming back. Again, this is, I feel like I just show up every week and we talk about boundaries. Obviously, since the presentation went live on Friday night, there's been a little bit of activity out there in the email and social media front, which totally expect that. I mean, you can't do something like boundary changes and program adjustments to a 25,000 student, 20,000 family community and not have someone ask questions or be concerned about things. And so that's exactly why we're here. And that's exactly why we're here tonight, 3 weeks before the board needs to make a decision on this, giving us hopefully ample time to be able to meet the needs of our community as well as the board to have a deep and rich understanding of the recommendations that we're going to present to you this evening. So I just wanted to put that out there and appreciate your time this evening. So quickly, our journey, you've seen this slide before, but I think it's important we kind of go back and highlight our work a little bit. So our first priority, as you know, was getting sixth grade to middle school. We did that. Appreciate the vote last week at the board meeting, moving sixth graders to middle school. Then we immediately jumped in and focused on our kids, specifically our students who attend our high-impact, lower socioeconomic schools, because we wanted to ensure that those schools had the opportunity to have a lower enrollment. If we could do that, we wanted to do that, and that's something we really focused on in this work, because those locations, those schools, those communities that we serve, they have a tendency to serve a faster-growing population, as well as a more transient population. And so it's important that we take those items into consideration when we're thinking about our boundaries and we're thinking about our capacities. And then to accomplish that, that meant we had to move kids around. We had to move kids east because our extra space in our schools were east and north. And again, it's hard for every single person who's looking at this PowerPoint presentation that's just posted on the web for them to understand kind of the rationale behind why we did what we did, and they're looking at boundaries going, how did this happen and why this doesn't make sense? Why is it so far over here? Hopefully we're going to be able to explain a little bit of that this evening. But the goal was to reduce those numbers in those high-impact schools to balance then the enrollment across the rest of the district as much as we possibly can, because we have to take into consideration our busing and transportation needs. So that's critically important as well, because we can't just say, let's do all these things, and then we go back to Justin and say, hey, can you make this happen? He's like, well, I need 47 more bus drivers. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, I guess we can't do it, sorry. So every step of the way, we needed to be working side by side with our transportation team to make sure that any recommendations we make to you, that based on our current workforce, we can do moving forward. And that's smart and that's wise. So our committee, and I'm going to introduce them here in a second because it's super important that they get recognition for the amount of time and energy that they put into this work. This is no easy task. It's not an easy thing to sit on a committee when you're being charged with adjusting boundaries or moving programs and you're having a voice for your particular feeder area, as well as coming into this space with your own opinions and perspectives and ideas and agendas. And so I want to give the committee, those that are here tonight, kudos for showing up at our meetings, being consistent, understanding that they are the voice of 25,000 students and 20,000 families, and their perspective matters. And there's been a lot of time and effort put in outside our committee meetings by our committee members, looking through data, looking at information, driving the roads, wondering what this means to this particular community or this particular neighborhood or this particular school or this particular program. And that's a big deal. That's not something that we had right here internal when we did the MGT study, but we have that now. And so they put a lot on their shoulders. And when questions come in from the board or on social media, it's kind of hard not to take things a little teeny bit personally, because it's like, man, we worked hard on that or tried to make this happen. But we understand that as well, because we're 25 strong now. You know, we started at 45, ended up with 25. And we know that there are 20,000 other perspectives out there. And so it's important that we recognize that as well. So as I've stated before, and it's this last piece on here, our committee believes our boundary recommendations give our students, families, and schools better access to special programs, in most cases reducing time on buses, removing most of our students from having to learn in portables, which I know is a goal, Takes enrollment pressure off the highest impacted schools and community, another very important piece. And we also know at this point, these are only recommendations. I can't tell you how many emails I've responded to in the last couple of days where I keep reiterating the fact that I appreciate and I understand you're frustrated and concerned. These are recommendations. These are what we believe our best effort recommendations to the board. So, and at this time, I just want to introduce all of our members that are here. I don't have a slide for them, but I have all their names. So you can just go ahead and wave when I call your name. Shannon Jex, Heidi Maurer, Kasha Jordan, Hannah Kelly, student right there. Thank you. David Kelly, Lori Stevens, Manuel Cardenas, Kendra Pratchett, Seyung Choi, Kirsten Duckett, Stephanie Nip, John Robinson, Ella Hillard, Rosa Villarreal, Jackie Cavins, Angeli Domovic, and Dave Buzzard. So there's 18 of us here tonight of the 25. And everyone else who couldn't make it told me they couldn't make it. So, and they're actually, for this next piece that I'm going to share with you, excited about this next opportunity as well. Oh, how about some listening sessions?
Thank you.
Hey, work's not complete. Seven months of work is not complete. And we knew coming into this
Yes.
that we were going to give ourselves 3 weeks of time. I didn't want to run in and do a whole bunch of listening sessions throughout the entire year when we have a committee that we've selected to do this work. Now that we've recommended, based on this presentation tonight, recommended these boundary changes, we're going to go out and meet our community. So we are set up 4 listening sessions. Here are the locations, here are the dates, the times. I've already worked with Faith Sisley, our Director of Communications. This will all be out tomorrow. Email, out on social media, as well as the front page of the website. So these will be available for anybody. Just because it's in the Kent Ridge Library doesn't mean that a Kent Lake parent couldn't go to it. Right. They're not specific to that strand. We wanted to create opportunities for people to be able to travel as least amount of time or as far amount of time. And we have 4 spaces, 4 different dates, because sometimes people's schedules don't work. So if you're a Kent Lake person, you can go to a KM1 and have a conversation, a question about a Kent Lake boundary piece. So it will be available for everybody. So it will not be a presentation. It's not going to be me standing in front going through 60 slides like I am tonight. This is going to be a question and answer. This is going to be an opportunity to provide clarification and clarity, create understanding, and to listen to the community. Now, if they have questions specifically about maps, we're going to have the maps right there. We're going to pull them right up. We're going to zoom in. We'll go to have a conversation. We'll give the rationale for why we did. We'll listen to the perspective, the opinion, the concern, and we'll kind of work through those pieces. That's what those 90-minute sessions will look like. And I also, and I'll say this at the end, I encourage not only the board members, but our community to continue sending emails and asking questions, continue to review the document, no matter how long it is. It's important because, again, we've already made a couple adjustments. The slide, the document I'm showing you tonight is different than the one that was posted on Friday.
Yep.
Because there are already little pieces here and there we're making adjustments on, not just spelling errors, but adjustments and corrections to statements that were inaccurate, or little tweaks and adjustments of things that we thought we'd made before we submitted it, and we're like, oh, we forgot that little section of that particular boundary, let's put that in there. And again, for the next 3 weeks, we're going through the same process. Nothing is set in stone until the board chooses to vote on whatever recommendations we present to them on November 9th. So this is a fluid process. We've spent our last 7 months together putting this together. Now we're going to spend the next three weeks listening and responding, going back through, making sure all of our numbers are accurate, making sure everything makes sense, and listening to the voices of our community and our board. So I just want to make that clear. So, our educational programs. These next 2 slides, I'm not going to read them all. They were in the original. Basically, they're just a quick definition of what each one of these programs are. Because when you're looking through the PowerPoint, you're going to see acronyms like SC, ASC, DL, and you're not going to know what those are. Not you, but people in general who are not working in the educational field are not understanding those pieces. So we define that here so people can have a more clear understanding what they're seeing there. What does this mean, this program here? And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. You guys have access to them. There are 2 slides worth. These are intensive educational programs out of our inclusive ed program. And so the one thing I do want to point out on these 4 particular programs is I put a ratio there. You see that ratio? That's the teacher to student ratio as dictated by the KEA contract. Those numbers have an impact on the overall capacity of our school. If you've got, for example, a link program in your school, it takes up 2 classrooms. Well, that's only, say, 20 kids. Well, if that classroom has capacity of 24, then that's minus 14 for each of those classrooms. And that's how we look at our capacity. We have a building capacity, and then we have a program capacity. So we're comparing apples to apples. So it's not like, well, I'm sorry, that's the way it is. It's 24 kids, you only have 10. So I just want to make sure you guys understood that and that we look at all of those pieces when we were doing this work. These next 2 slides were also on there. These were the elementary to middle school, high school feeder plans. So one thing I want you to notice when you're looking at these, we made it clear, and I've been pretty clear with the board throughout my weekly updates since last spring, that it was not a priority to make sure that all of our feeders patterns aligned with each other. If after all of our goals, which were really to make sure that we could decrease the enrollment in our high impact schools, balance enrollment, and make sure that our programs were equitably dispersed across the district, after that, if we are able to align our feeder patterns, then we would do that. And we were able to make some adjustments so that could happen. And I know that's something that is still challenging for our community because some people are like, man, I really wanted to know that my kid was going to Crestwood and then Matson and Kentwood. Why is he going to Crestwood, Matson, and Kent Lake? And there are several examples of that throughout both of these slides and within the maps, that there was just no way to be able to make that happen and have balanced, as much as we possibly could, balanced enrollment across the board, as well as meet our staffing that we have, our staffing restrictions that we have in transportation. So we tried to find the best possible way so it could be a win-win. And I know that we're going to be listening to that and hearing from our parents, and I understand that, and we're totally ready and willing to accept those concerns and kind of walk them through a little bit about our rationale again. So both these slides, as you guys have access to, so does our community. You'll see those pieces. So, all right. So, questions up to now, this point? Any questions about anything that I've shared? Because it really was more of like the rationale and the goals and going back through what I've kind of previously stated, and then also throwing in the listening session. So, but before we dive into 50 slides of maps, I want to be able to answer any questions.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
This is listening sessions. I hope we're providing translation.
Let me go back to that, make sure that it was stated on the bottom there.
It is?
Sessions are
Okay.
going to be videotaped, and we're working on translation services to accompany each of those sessions as well.
Cool.
I can't speak to how many languages
Right.
that we're going to have available,
Right.
but we definitely are working to make that happen. Yep. As well as, and I'll just add to it, my conversation that I had with Faith, like an hour and a half ago, we talked about what would it look like to translate this PowerPoint presentation or a modified PowerPoint presentation, or to be able to even sit down and do something that allows, whether it be me reading the PowerPoint presentation in a more different format and then having that be able to be translated. So everyone has an opportunity. I know it's real hard. I mean, we've got 136 languages.
Absolutely. It's
not,
hard. It's hard.
Not that easy, but what we're trying to do is create space for families, and then part of our robust communication plan will be to make sure that we create so much more space come November 10th through the duration of the rest of the school year to make sure all families have access. If it's one family that speaks a particular language, we will spend the time to find a person to be able to sit down and be able to translate that so they have a deep understanding for the impact it has on their family and their child. So, yep.
Wait, I do have a question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mr. Behringer. I do have a question about the listening sessions and the intent in them. It sounds like that they are not just to tell this is what we're doing,
Nope.
but to get feedback, which I understand we have a large committee. Some of these, it feels like maybe the sessions maybe should have come a little bit earlier, that personal opinion on this one, because I look at the date like Kentwood on November 3rd. We're voting on this on November 9th. So we have to have all the information to us 3 days before, because we don't want to be less than that. And so that's the 6th. So really, we have 4th, 5th, and 6th to input any information that we want to change from our Kentwood parents and any other parents. That just seems like a very tight time frame to be able to incorporate on some things that are pretty big. I would especially say some of the programs. I think that that's going to be an area of concern for many parents.
Director Margell, I think you bring up a good point, but I also want to say that's assuming that there are large-scale changes that need to occur that are different than the recommendations that we're putting forward. So we're creating space to listen. Again, we're hoping that those that are coming to these sessions, they've either looked at this and that's why they have concerns, or they're coming to ask questions. Again, we can pull up our slides and be able to go through the maps and things like that with them. So once people have a deeper understanding for why changes were made, now granted, it's not going to change everyone's mind. It's like, well, you moved my program from this school to this school, I'm not happy, and I don't want my kid to be bused there, even though we bus kids all over the district right now from program to program, so lots of families are impacted by that as well. But back to your timing piece, I believe, because we'll be sitting down as a small group after each one of these, going through the notes, going back through the questions that were asked. Are there any things that we need to address? And then I've already talked to Israel in that, well, I'll be a part of 2x2s, but I also can make it a point to make sure that you guys are brought up to speed on anything that are any adjustments that are going on. Also, I'm hoping, and I have this in a later slide, but I'll share it now, that throughout this entire process tonight, as well as over the next couple weeks, that you guys are going back through this material, you're listening and hearing from your constituents, that you're sending that information to me that I can answer, and then I'm responding back. I've been CCing you on all board responses that you guys have sent to me that I'm sending back to you and responding to the community member. So as you're seeing things and you're having questions, I want you to ask those questions personally from yourself as well, because I want to be able to create as much clarity as I possibly can. In the end, there are going to be people that are not going to get exactly what they want. And these recommendations are going to impact some in ways that they're not comfortable with or frustrated with. But we're not able to, or in a position to be able to make every single adjustment from every single person who wants something to look different. So we've got to look at the totality of the work that we've done and the data that backs it up and the rationale for why we're doing it and the supports that we're providing to making sure that that transition, whatever they may be, is as comfortable and welcoming as we possibly can. So I believe that we'll be able to get that information to you incrementally and timely as any changes come forward after each one of these presentations. Or not a presentation, but listening session. Because I do not plan on standing up and talking like I am tonight. Okay?
May I just add a thank you to that question? And here's why. If you go back maybe a month and a half, 2 months, I shared with the board the importance of communicating early, often. Sometimes that window isn't, but I appreciate that question because that is what happened the last 2 boundaries that I know I was in this district. And it happened to families who do not speak English as their first language at home. Then I said to the board, I think you may remember, that the first time that they heard that there was a change in their boundary was when their bus didn't show up.
Yes.
And so I think it's incumbent upon us to continue to do the communication as early as often as we can, but also look at other avenues. And I appreciated Director Farah's question about the translations in those pieces. I remember saying that, and I know that with your question, I think about, so what are other ways that if I can't make it to that session, that I still can get my question asked or answer to the question that I have asked. So that helps, I think, my team really think of alternative ways, and I know Ms. Sisley certainly has been a part of the other two boundary pieces that I mentioned, that we'll continue to do our due diligence in that area. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, and I put a slide at the end of the slideshow that has, what if I have questions? Like, what do I do? So that'll be there as well. And again, I want to remind everyone, everyone on the dais that these are recommendations 3 weeks before you need to take a vote. So I don't want anyone to think that I expect when I walk out of here tonight and the 18 people that are sitting in this room that you're going to go, oh man, sounds good. Let's just rubber stamp that thing and move on. Why do we got to wait till the 9th? I don't expect that. I expect not only for you as board members to do your due diligence, but the community members as well to dig into things. There are things that we've heard in the last 4 days that we didn't see when we put that out there, and we've already made those adjustments. And so it's not like well, that's just the way it is. They're not going to listen to us. I know that's the rumor out there. That is not true. So if people have questions, I encourage them to ask. We will give our rationale and justification for that. In some cases, we may be looking pretty deeply on suggestions or perspectives to see if because one of our things that I shared at the board work session a couple weeks ago was, if we don't have to do it, do we need to do it? If we don't need to negatively impact a particular area or program or whatever, then why do we need to do that? But what we need to understand too is that when we're looking at our programs, and I know that I'm not to that slide yet, but I'm kind of wanting to answer this question a little bit more, is that we intentionally added additional inclusive ed programs in our district in a way that will only positively benefit our kids and our schools and our community as a whole, which is a great thing. Now, when we do that, because we're trying to create space and opportunity for kids to be able to access programs in the schools that they reside in or a neighboring school that they reside in, we're looking at programs that are impacted when we move that away. Prime example, I'm going to use this example because it's already been brought up and it's already been shared on social media as well as through board communication. Carriage Crest, SC program. Been there for a long time. Super strong program, great staff, positive climate and culture in the building, all that stuff. So we're looking at trying to figure out, well, where do all those kids that go to the Carriage Crest SC program, where do they reside? Do they reside in that particular school? Are they in that area? So of the 22 kids that are in the 2 classes of SC at Carriage Crest, there are 2 students that actually reside at Carriage Crest. And ideally, we'd have a program at every single school. Yeah. If we had the staffing and we had an abundance of SC teachers and paraeducators, which we know we don't, then that would be great. Because who am I to say that 2 years from now, we're not going to have 3 or 4 or 5 more kids that are going to join Carriage Crest as SC students, and we're going to need to have that program. And we've talked internally, if that happens, then we need to add a program there, or add a program back if you follow the current recommendations as they're shared tonight. So I just want people to know, we're not just moving things willy-nilly. That's not our goal or intent. But we're trying to figure out where our students reside so we can get our programs to them so there's less travel time and less of a negative impact on those students and the families that are moving to and from. So again, recommendations, still looking at things, still listening to everybody. Elementary schools. So now we're going to jump in. We've got about 45 slides, which we have till 7. So I'm just reminding you. Hang on.
Hard stop.
I'm not going to spend a ton of time on every single one of these maps. And when I say not spending a ton of time, we're talking about 20 seconds. Right. I'm going to read to you some key points about why those boundaries were adjusted. And I expect as time goes on, and I'll say this again, that you're either making notes, you're taking notes, and you're coming back with questions, a little bit more detailed, I can give you a deeper question or deeper response. So, with that said, we're going to start with Carriage Crest. In this one, we followed the main road along 124th and took over part of the Glen Ridge boundary. We balanced enrollment by cutting or moving the Carriagewood neighborhood to Ridgewood Elementary School. If you remember, that was a conversation that came up in the MGT boundary work. Cedar Valley. Oh, mine's out of order. Let me get to my notes. We followed the parcel lines. That's another thing to realize. So this goes for all of ours. We had 20-year-old parcel lines that developments and houses had been built, and we had boundaries that were all cattywampus and all over the place. So we had to fix all those on every single school.
Wow.
Road by road, development, house by house, property line by property line, and get that all cleaned up. So that was a big deal. Keeping neighborhoods together.
Thank you. Thank you.
The committee encouraged adding a neighborhood immediately below Pipe Lake or south of Pipe Lake. You can see that there in the yellow on the right-hand side, because each one of these maps has a current boundary and then a proposed boundary, okay? And then we intentionally left Cedar Valley small, because I think I've shared this before in a previous, maybe a bond, I don't even know when I shared this, but we have a Lake Point development that's getting built. If you've driven out there on Highway 18 off of 256,
Yep, right.
one, you're probably not getting there very quickly when you cross over Wax Road because or 180th because you're driving through all the cones. But that entire pit out there is going to be housing and retail space. And we stand to gain upwards of 550 to 600 students between 2024 and 2027. So not knowing exactly where they're going to fit, we had to plan ahead with where should we leave capacity. Well, they're all on the east side of Highway 18. They butt up against Cedar Valley, which is our smallest elementary school. When you look at these numbers, the smallest capacity. But we also know they're going to be the quickest to grow when that development comes in, as well as Jenkins Creek, which as you can see in the blue or purple here as well. So that's why we left capacity in that particular space at Cedar Valley. Covington, we followed the parcel lines, got that cleaned up a little bit. And Covington, we built a brand new school and slapped 4 portables on the property a year later. Okay, well, that doesn't work. So, people want to go to brand new schools, transfers, things like that. And so we reduced the boundary at Covington and cleaned that up a little bit. So we're not traveling back and forth across Highway 18 in that particular case. Crestwood, we kept the main roads as the boundaries, followed the parcel lines. And then we want to make note that there's not very many kids above the 240th. So we kind of rolled them into what you'll see Lake Young's here in a little bit. So Crestwood got a little smaller. Just in case also, even though the Lake Point development's on the east side of Highway 18, they could feed into Cedar Valley, into Jenkins Creek. If by chance the developer changed what they're doing and we needed more space, Crestwood is the next closest elementary school right there off of 256 and 180th. Daniel Elementary, the neighborhood along 116th was taken out, moved to Martin Sortune to balance enrollment. And that's part of that is that Daniel is considered a high impact school. So Daniel functions pretty high on the number of kids in there. Even though this says 84%, that's also because Daniel has a LINK program and an ECSC program. So our preschool special education program that's housed there as well. And so that is our highest capacity school that we have at the elementary level, 84. Prior to those programs, they're under 80% capacity without those programs. And so those programs, they serve, again, 10 kids in each of those classroom sections. So it does reduce the number, the overall capacity of the building. East Hill, we balanced enrollment with Panther Lake and Park Orchard. East Hill, considered a high-impact school. which is why we adjusted the boundary of our East Hill Elementary School, which for some people may seem weird because you're looking at that map, and we purposely made these maps big enough because that was a major issue with our MGT stuff, is you couldn't make it out. Nobody could look at the map and say, oh, I know what road that is or where that's at. No one had a clue. It was just a blob on a screen. And so when you're looking at this and you're thinking about like, oh, I drive by there, almost all those kids can walk to East Hill now. Not all of them, but almost all of them. You know, if you think about, if you're going down 240th or Smith, James.
Yeah.
James? Smith. I don't
James.
know why I get them all like, oh man.
James.
James. It's got the overpass,
Yeah.
the bridge that goes over the top.
Right,
So a big part of that northern part of the neighborhood can walk over that to be able to get to East Hill. Okay. Emerald Park, we followed the parcel lines, kept the neighborhoods together. We tried to clean some things up. I mean, there were a lot of things, as you can see in the current, or the original, which is the current, they were like rounded boundaries. Like we really needed to clean that stuff up and do things that made sense as much as we possibly could when it came to boundaries. Fairwood, we added neighborhood off 177th. This is may be considered to be like, why do we do that? Fairwood had capacity. Our schools up north had plenty of capacity, and so we needed to move our kids. We need to shift them, if at all possible. And so that neighborhood we added actually is on the south side of Petrovisky, but they're already being bused to Fairwood. Those kids that were in that neighborhood that were actually going to Ridgewood. If you can see the purple there on the current. They were already on a bus, so we already had a bus. So we just took that bus and we moved it over to that triangle, and we're going to take those kids to Fairwood because they had space. Glen Ridge, little cleanup here. Follow the parcel lines, main roads to keep the neighborhoods together, specifically the neighborhood below 200th Street. Okay, so you can see we cleaned that up. This one had a couple little extra arms on it, and so we cleaned it up a little bit. And then if you know this area, you know the Seuss Creek runs right through there. You got the little valley through there that it's got the power lines and all that kind of stuff in the trail. So there's not a lot of students on that northeast side where you see the creek running in there and the little water area there. So we just cleaned that up a little bit, so that would go to Glen Ridge. And then we also left room for capacity because we've got, based on the recommendations we're sharing tonight, Odyssey program going there that's coming from Ridgewood and Lake Youngs. Grass Lake, we followed the main roads. We did talk within our committee. We went back and forth and then finally landed on moving the Grass Lake northern boundary up to Kent Kangley. And so we did that. You can see that on the right-hand side there. I just realized that like that it can just be moved up here. Grass Lake, one of our mini schools, either northeast or southeast that have capacity. So even though we made that adjustment, as you can see that purple area there that used to be Jenkins Creek and now is Grass Lake, total, there were like 30 kids there. So not a huge shift, but enough to be able to kind of clean things up at lines. And as you know, if you've driven out there as well, there's a huge multi-year road widening project going out, heading towards Maple Valley on Kent Kangley, running through there. And so what a better reason to put a line right there, because now you're going to, instead of 2 lanes, you're going to have 5 lanes. 2 lanes on each side and a suicide lane in the middle. So there's some space there. Horizon Elementary, follow the main roads as boundaries, kept the neighborhoods together along 132nd. And then we added the triangle northeast of Highway 18. So you can see that's this triangle right here. If you look to the east of 152nd, Horizon had some space. We cleaned up some boundaries. As you can see, they had a little bump out into the yellow, which is Pine Tree, thank you. I'm like, dang it, I got to get that. And so there was some space there. It made sense, again, trying to use Highway 18 as a natural boundary line. So that's Horizon, Jenkins Creek. Totally not even on my list. So Jenkins Creek, I can just speak to this. Cedar Valley was our smallest capacity school by far. We were slated roughly about 180 kids in that space. We knew that we needed to build that space up a little bit. Jenkins Creek, obviously the natural school to be able to share the love of enrollment with Cedar Valley. So in doing that, and then all of this with Grass Lake taking on part of Jenkins Creek's boundary got smaller. If you look at it, it looks kind of odd. Like, why are we jumping around that particular space where Cedar Heights is? We had a lot of conversation around how much do we take and who's on buses and things like that. And so this is what we landed on. We moved all the way to Highway 18 again, back to the idea of using Highway 18 as our boundary line for our elementary schools as much as we possibly could, which then increased the number. That little section that you see that we inherited, so it's that Covington piece, that little triangle that was added from one to the other. That helped get those numbers up. So Jenkins Creek is again, another school that we've left capacity for the Lake Point development. So that's important to note. Kent Elementary, all right. I can honestly say, and so can every committee member sitting in this room, that we spent more time on Kent Elementary than probably any other elementary school. And why? Why? Because Kent Elementary this year is the highest capacity elementary school we have. In fact, last year the same thing, in that we had the most kids. We had to move programs because there wasn't any more room. There was requests for like adding more portables on the property. There's no space to put portables on that property. And so we really focused on Kent Elementary. And if you know that valley area down there, it's tight. And you can cut and move all you want. But the fact is, like, you can look at the current to the proposed. We sliced and diced Kent Elementary all the way down to the point where literally we've got Scenic Hill kids that are a rock throw across the street. Well, it's a little bit further than that, across 516. But it's close. And those kids are going to Scenic Hill now because we needed to reduce the number of kids at Kent Elementary. And we went on and on and on and on. And we finally got it down to 78% capacity. And then we counted the programs in because we do that after the fact. And they're at 80%. And so, but they were 115%.
Wow.
So that took a lot of work, and it was the right work. And I can tell you right now, I appreciate the committee members, not just Rosa, as she has a vested interest in this, but other committee members that made sure that we kept on pushing. And our goal was to get every single school under 80%.
Right.
Good,
Especially our high impact schools.
right, good.
And so it was a challenge, but it was the right thing, and it was going to work out well. And also, back to my point that I made earlier, our high-impact schools, they're the fastest-growing schools.
Yep.
Our Valley and East Hill schools,
Are.
when you consider the number of multifamily housing units that, one, are currently in place, two, that are already being built right now. I mean, there are 3 active apartment complexes being built in the Valley right this second that we're having to take into consideration as we're thinking, like, how much more can we carve out of here to make sure that we can account for these multifamily or these 2 and 3 and 4 bedroom units that are being built in some of these developments. And so all that stuff gets taken into consideration. We have to have knowledge of all of that. So that's really important. So we worked hard for that. I will put this out there right now. It's a conversation that's happening behind the scenes. I don't want anyone to think that we're not naive to the fact that we need to address our transfer process when we're thinking about all the work that we just did. Because I've had conversations with Randy Heath and his department, in that we need to look at, 1, our transfer process, but 2, the amount of work that was gone into creating these schools and getting them to a capacity that I won't even say manageable, but just to a lower capacity than they're currently functioning at right now, the last thing we want to do is open the doors to any kind of transfer that we want to have happen outside of people that currently or are moving into the boundary or are there for a program. So we're going to have to talk about, do we need to, sorry, Kent's closed. And those are the kind of conversations we have to have. Because what we don't want is just be like, jump right back into, oh gosh, now you got 75 transfers, now you're back up to 93%. Sorry, we tried to do it. And so we've got to be really intentional about that. And those are the conversations that we're having. Those are the communication that's going to be coming out here in the next couple months as we kind of get that figured out, what that looks like. But I just wanted you to know that we know that that's going to be a conversation, because the transfer process is something that happens in this district. Lake Young's, we followed the parcel boundaries. We balanced out the enrollment. We made it huge because half of that geographic land right there is uninhabitable. Yeah, we didn't want to get too close to Glen Ridge. So that's where the zigzags go, and you can see that's where Seuss Creek goes as well. And there's not many students to the east or south side of that boundary. As you can see, there's a big lake there, and if you've ever been up there, there's a fence around the lake, and there's no houses in there. So, but we felt like we wanted to clean some things up and try to have things make a little bit more sense. They had some capacity, and so we made those adjustments for Lake Young's. Morton Sortoon added to Park Orchard while balancing the enrollment at Daniel Elementary School. Again, Daniel being a high-impact school. We added the rectangle above 240th to Sunrise for transportation and enrollment purposes. So you are on this, you're looking at the gray in the middle there. Martin Sortoon had fingers, 2 fingers. Both those fingers had buses that went to Martin Sortoon. If you've been to Martin Sortoon and the bus loop and the pickup and the drop off, you'll know it's a nightmare. Mm-hmm. So some adjustments were made where more of these kids are walkers than bus riders, which is a good thing for this particular school. So we made those adjustments to kind of clean up some things. We carved into Daniel to, even though it seems very close to the Daniel Elementary School, Daniel needed a little bit more. As you saw on the previous slide, they were at 84% capacity with their programs. And so we needed to take off a little bit more off that and give it to Martin Sortoon. So that was part of that balancing. Meadow Ridge got a lot bigger and a lot longer. So if you're familiar with Meadow Ridge, and I know Doug is, we added a lot to Meadow Ridge. Meadow Ridge went from, kind of a little bit smaller school to one of our bigger elementary schools. And we appreciate that because we needed to make some moves. When you're moving kids out of the valley and off the East Hill and trying to reduce the high-impact schools, you've got to have other schools kind of pick up some of those pieces. And so we had buses already that were busing kids in certain areas. We just switched the bus from one school to another school to be able to drive those kids to Meadow Ridge. So we followed the main roads and parcel boundaries there. And you can see that. We also picked up a little bit of Scenic Hill down there on the south Green River area. Meridian Elementary School, followed the parcel boundaries, kept the area west of 132nd as Meridian to balance enrollment. Cleaned up the parcel lines, you can definitely see that. Moved a little bit north of the Meridian Golf and Country Club there, northeast. And then one thing that you don't see on this, that's not on the current boundary, there was a little teeny island over about a school and a half away that actually went to Meridian. It was a couple apartment complexes. Okay. And so we cleaned that up. They're going to their neighborhood school now. But I also want to note that, and I have these in some other notes that I've shared, this will have an impact on that school's culture, demographic, and resources. because a very, very large chunk of the students, and again, we're not talking hundreds of kids, but we're talking, 50, 60 kids, came from those apartment complexes, most of all which were free and reduced lunch, most of all which were students of color. So they will feel and see an impact. And I can say that that's probably one of the very few, if any, other schools that will see maybe that kind of impact. So I just want you to know that. And trust me when I say I know that, because I've heard it from my wife over and over again, and she blames me. So I'm going to have to go to the apartments and apologize to the families. So Millennium, out of the triangle along 250th and 116th to balance out the enrollment. You can see that piece. That's the piece I'm talking about. That pink piece, that was Meridian Elementary School. That area in there, there's a couple apartment complexes. And so that went away and went to Millennium. Pine Tree took the area around the Springwood Park to allow for higher enrollment, and then the neighborhood kept together off of 132nd. So it changed its form quite a bit. This is, one thing that the committee members are noticing, as well as the community out there, as I'm reading posts all the time, is, oh my gosh, why did we put all these schools where we put them? Well, yeah, hindsight being 2020. I mean, back when they were built, every year from, 38s at Meridian to River Ridge, someone 30 years from now is going to say, why did you put River Ridge on the west hill of Kent? It makes no sense. And so it is what it is. Right. We, as a system, over the last, 80 years have inherited where our schools are located. And so we have to work with those pieces to try to balance enrollment and do things that, to the community's eyes, make sense, which is not always easy. Neely O'Brien, we balance the enrollment. For those of you that have been in the district for a bit, Neely O'Brien used to be our largest elementary school in the entire district. They were 800 plus students a handful of years ago, a high impact school, a portable city down there in the valley. And then we made adjustments to add River Ridge. We sucked 70% of the student population out of Neely O'Brien and sent them to River Ridge, and made Neely O'Brien one of our smallest elementary schools in the entire district. As you have all known, we've all said this, is that when we came back to do this boundary work, even though the board approved in February of 21 the boundary adjustments to our seven elementary schools that fed River Ridge, we knew we needed to come back and do a complete, comprehensive review of our boundaries and make those adjustments. Now, Neely O'Brien, being a very large school anyhow, will move itself back up a little bit. And again, we worked to bring the capacities down in our high impact schools to below 80 because there are so many kids and there's so many growth opportunities for developments as well. And so one of the commitments that we've made, and I know this is not in this script right here, but I'll say it, is that we've committed to review our boundaries no less than every 3 years. And when I say review our boundaries, I'm not saying full-scale boundary changes like this. Mm-hmm. If we've done our work correctly, when we're done 3 weeks from now, and the board approves whatever those recommendations are, we should be able to come back every 3 years and say, hey, we got two developments that came in, we didn't notice that. We need to make this little adjustment here on this, and it's gonna work out fine. We don't need to touch anything else. That's the goal from now on. We're not doing large-scale movements unless we're building a new school because we have a big piece of property and we got to make some adjustments. So outside of that, we plan on keeping on top of these things. And this is 12 years. It was a long, long time, long overdue to make these adjustments. Panther Lake, follow the boundary parcels, balance the enrollment at Park Orchard to alleviate Panther Lake by extending the boundary west. You can see that a little bit. And then the area around Kemp Bowl. So if you're familiar with the valley and you're driving central and you're heading to get on 167, right on the right-hand side there before you get to Denny's is the Kemp Bowl. And there's some developments there that house a lot of students. And so it's interesting when we do the map work and we're working with location analytics, map software work, and Ella's going through that, and you see a little kid down there. It's like, oh, there's a kid. And you pop it up, and it's like, Justin's like, there's 66 kids there and 2 buses. We're like, whoa. So you just can't look at a heat map of kids and go, oh my gosh, that doesn't look very much.
Right.
Because that one kid represents 2 full developments down there or 2 full buses. Mm-hmm. So we had to look at all of those pieces, had to go into every single one of those individually to make sure that we were looking at things accurately. Park Orchard Elementary, balanced enrollment, kept neighborhoods together. 240th, cleaned that up a little bit. You can see that they inherited a little bit of the Martin Sortoon down in the south down there. They also picked up part of Daniel north of 240th. We also squeezed into a little bit of East Hill to help that area. So if you know, if you're driving north on 104th, Valley Key, several different multifamily housing units, Valley Key right past 240th heading north. We pulled those into Park Orchard. They used to be a part of East Hill Elementary School. And so we made those adjustments because Park Orchard had capacity. Pine Tree, follow the main roads for boundaries. Long conversation, I'm going to tell you pretty shortly. Birch Creek. So there was a lot of conversation around Birch Creek with MGT. We had conversations about Birch Creek from the get-go in our committee. One of our goals as well, even though it wasn't the number one goal, it was a goal, was if we don't have to negatively impact and I say this right after I said Meridian, we just took away a chunk of their resources and their diversity. But Birch Creek, who's been a part of the Cedar Heights and Kent Lake boundary area for the last 12 years, when we had that conversation of what does it, those kids on the bus for a long time and the impact and all that kind of stuff, we went out and talked to the kids at the high school level, and I'm glad that we made it out of there alive. Because they were ready to take us, they were ready to beat us down. We came out with posters and everything like that and said, do not move us.
Okay.
We like where we're at. They gave us rationales all over the place about how much they liked the bus rides. And so we had 66 kids in that room, and there were 2 kids that asked about the transfer process, and everyone else was like, and then those 2 kids, like they couldn't even raise their hand without feeling like they were gonna get yelled at by everybody else. We also got a petition. So needless to say, we wanted to keep Birch Creek with the Kent Lake Strand. Birch Creek wanted to stay with the Kent Lake Strand. So Pine Tree goes to the Kent Lake Strand. So Birch Creek is going to Pine Tree. They have the capacity, they have the space, and so that's where that piece is. Ridgewood, again, our schools up north, schools down south, everything out east. Most of them had plenty of capacity. We made some adjustments with Ridgewood to alleviate Carriage Crest, and then you can see that there's not really any students around the lake pieces. If you know that the reservoir and the fenced area goes a little bit further north, you can see that shaded area in there, and then we kind of cleaned that up, gave that to Lake Youngs, because we knew we were pulling Carriage Wood off of Carriage Crest and adding to Ridgewood. So that's that one. River Ridge, brand new elementary school. The largest elementary school by capacity and design. They can house the most kids. But just because it can house the most kids doesn't mean we bus everybody up the hill to the west side. So we follow the parcel lines. We cleaned up some things. As you know, if you know Kent Valley well, there's not a lot of kids that live in the train track industrial area of the valley. The Ridgewood or the River Ridge population really is on the West Hill, and then they're down in the valley where on the east side of 167 and on the west side of 167 down there by 228th in that area down there. So a good number, and then some kids down. Not a lot of kids, but there are some kids down there as you go down south because it kind of wraps around Neely O'Brien there, as you can see. So and a great space. Kendra being very easy to work with. We added a program to her school. They have the space. They have great resources for the kids there, and then they have students that reside in that area that will benefit from that program versus busing River Ridge kids to other schools to access that program. We can actually have space to house that program there. Sawyer Woods, the one and only school in the entire school district that did not get touched for boundaries. Because who are you gonna move out there?
No.
What are you gonna move out there? You're not gonna move anything. Grass Lake was small enough, we didn't need to give anything to Sawyer Woods from Grass Lake.
Right.
So that is the one and only school in the entire district that we did not touch. Scenic Hill. We alleviated Kent Elementary and East Hill while adding to Scenic Hill. Not many students east of 167 on 83rd, so you can see that purple there where the West Valley Highway is. Not a lot of kids down there. And then also down, if just south of where you can see Scenic Hill Elementary, the little apple there, that's the Green River Valley down in there, fields and things like that. It's bordered right there by 277th. So if you drive down the hill on 277th, heading down towards the freeway, on the right-hand side, it's fields. And then the Green River runs right at the base of the ridge line there, or the hill. That's Scenic Hill. Seuss Creek followed the parcel boundaries and kept the neighborhoods together. So we just cleaned that one up. It had a whole bunch of weird designs, and now it has even more designs, but they actually make sense. So that's Seuss Creek. Springbrook kept the neighborhoods together for transportation purposes. Not many students on that west side of 167. So if you were to zoom back out to this, if you think about 167 obviously is down in the valley, Springbrook up on the hill. Anything west of 167 going across that valley floor, not a lot of housing down there. Not a lot of students. Most all of Springbrook students are on the hill. And Sunrise, we balanced the enrollment. We cleaned up the parcel lines a little bit. We added a program because there was a need and a space. So they picked up a link program. Middle schools. All right, I'm going to cruise through the rest of these, and then we'll have lots of time for more questions if you have any. Do you have any questions about the elementaries? Yeah, Tim.
There were two schools that I was a little concerned about, and it primarily is about access from homes to schools.
Okay.
One was Lake Young's, and the fact that you're clear on the other side of the lake, and there aren't a lot of roads that go through there. It's difficult to look at the map and not wonder if there is no perfect answer, and I get that, but.
Just respond to that, though. That was a conversation we had. Justin shared that there is a bus or buses that actually, we obviously don't stay right within our boundary lines when we're driving bus. Sometimes you gotta swoop outside of the KSD boundary to drive around a space to like drive around the lake. So you pick up kids here, but you might have to come around this upside to pick up the kid over there. So this map, if it was blown up, you could see a little bit more, like if a bus needed to run out 224th and keep going out east to be able to come back around. There's no direct lines on some of this stuff. You're absolutely right. But we looked at every one of these to make sure that we can still provide the transportation and do what we need to do. Yeah, but I appreciate, that was one of those odd ones we had a conversation about.
All right. The other one is Scenic Hill. And I have real serious concerns given the population being served from the valley floor. There's no simple way to get up to Scenic Hill. And so the three different things that stick in my mind. Number one, working parents who want to basically attend a school function up there, whether it's parent conference or whatever. The second one is very simply, what do you do with a kid, a medical appointment, the school bus is gone, how in heaven's name do they get up there? And then it is a significant pocket of poverty. It's very hard for those families to create those workarounds. And so bus dependency on that valley floor for that school is just scary. Just making an observation.
Yeah, and we know that we're not going to ask kids to walk from, 167 to Springbrook. I mean, not Springbrook, but to Scenic Hill. And so there is a lot of transportation that occurs for Scenic Hill, even though for some I go, gosh, that looks like it's in a walking boundary, because we have our walking boundaries, you know what they are. But we do provide transportation to students that live within a walking boundary, but you can't really call it a walking boundary if geographically it's a challenge for students to be able to get there safely.
Well, if you taught archery, they could hunt deer going up the hillside.
Yeah.
Questionable.
I just want to say that, I see Dave taking notes, and I appreciate him taking notes for us, and we'll come back with some additional thoughts on some things, but I appreciate you bringing that up. We talked about Scenic Hill quite a bit when we're like, how far do we take Scenic Hill down into the valley? But when you're trying to figure out, which schools can take the pressure off Kent? It's like, well, we're loading Neely O'Brien up, and we're almost right there anyhow. And then it's like, you can't push up to East Hill because we're trying to take the pressure off East Hill. Yeah. Well, you can't draw this thing up here and go to River Ridge, because then that doesn't make sense. So yeah, it was these were topics of conversation that we had over and over again. So, but I appreciate you picking up on those pieces. Any other questions about elementaries?
Yes.
Yeah.
The SC program you talked about earlier, that's at Carriage Crest.
Yep.
It looks like, if I can look at all the labels, it's now being added to Emerald Park, Glen Ridge, Martin Sortoon, and River Ridge.
So you're talking, no. So I haven't gotten to that part of the presentation when I'll talk about so we added multiple SC programs across the district.
Okay.
So that particular SC program at Carriage Crest, looking at the students that are served in that program and what schools they reside in, our recommendation is that we're moving that particular program, just that program, to Ridgewood. So the kids that were in that program at Carriage Crest, Fairwood kids, Ridgewood kids, Carriage Crest kids, would go to Ridgewood. So Fairwood, it's already being bused to Carriage Crest, would be bused to Ridgewood. Ridgewood kids would stay at Ridgewood because that's the largest number of students in that program. And then Carriage Crest students would be bused to Ridgewood in the current recommendation. Then we also added, another 5 or 6 SC programs scattered around the district where we had the larger student populations in those residing schools. And then we'll have where those kids will then go.
Okay. I'm glad you talked about where kids are from, because I looked at the Odyssey program specifically, moving from 2 long-standing schools that are highly populated by the students that live within that boundary, and the schools on the other side that are now going to Glen Ridge. And so it looks like none of those students would be going to a middle school because those schools would then go to Northwood, but Glen Ridge goes to Meeker.
Correct.
And so we're talking about a population that already feels a little segregated from the rest of the school, and now we're making them go to a school that they don't have sports programs, they don't have any of those connections because they're 3 schools away. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Not right this second, because I haven't even gotten to the program stuff yet,
Okay.
which is part of my presentation.
Okay, sorry.
So-
when we talked about the elementary schools, I assumed that the programs
Nope,
went with it.
You're right, yeah. And so trying to figure out where to put everything in the program so we can get through everything. And it might even be something that we'll have to have an additional conversation around because it could take a little bit longer than that.
That's fair.
So, okay.
No, I appreciate the time to be able to talk about those. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when we get to the Odyssey program and that adjustment, I'll speak to some numbers to answer some of the things that you're talking about just in that particular example. And so people have a little bit more context.
Okay, thank you.
So here's our middle school. Oh, any other elementary questions? Okay, because again, 3 weeks. Anytime you have questions, please let me know. Middle schools. This again is the feeder pattern. When we could, we tried to make those adjustments, as you can see, and it was not our goal, and it's still something that bothers me and others. The new middle school right now, based on boundaries and where they're getting kids, are slated to go to Kent Lake, Kentwood, or KM. And so that's definitely something that we tried to find every way to be able to make the adjustments to make things work. But it doesn't mean that we don't have 3 more weeks to keep looking if there are suggestions or thoughts around that. So our middle schools, this will be fairly quick. Matson, that's all the schools. Matson, that's not Matson, that's Cedar Heights, alphabetical order. Cedar Heights, we follow the main roads to keep the neighborhoods together. We agreed that we'd keep the Birch Creek neighborhood with the elementary boundary that feeds to Cedar Heights and Kent Lake. So Cedar Heights, big boundary area, as you can see, very expansive. It had space, and we made Cedar Heights a very large middle school now. When you bring 6th graders up to all your middle schools, even though you bring a new middle school on board, your schools are still going to be bigger than what they currently are. And so that's just something to take into consideration. So Matson, balanced enrollment by adding the neighborhood along Wax Road. So the current is on the left-hand side there. And so trying to put more kids into Matson, we pulled that piece that goes against what we were working on, which was the boundary stuff, but we really needed to be able to get more kids into Matson. And so we jumped across there over where the medical facility is there, that little triangle, or half a triangle, trapezoid, I guess is what it is, to pull that into Matson. Meeker, follow the parcel boundaries along the east side, and then relieve Mill Creek by adding the neighborhood by the Kent Bowl. So we pulled quite a bit down south. If you can look at the original right now, our current, Meeker kind of winded his way all the way down to Kent Phoenix Academy, where the new middle school is. So we cleaned that up, kept them more up north. And so that's what that boundary is. 167 is the boundary there as well. But they do cut into the valley a little bit down by Kent Bowl. Meridian Middle School. Follow the parcel lines on the north boundary, and then the neighborhood 116th follows the elementary school boundary of Martin Sertoon. So it doesn't look much different. We cleaned up that whole northern side of 256 though. That went to the new middle school because that made sense. Cleaned up the parcel lines. So that's Meridian. We did also add an ASC program there, as I'll share a little bit later. We only had one middle school ASC program, yet we had enough students to warrant another ASC program. Meridian had space, and so and they are more centrally located based on where those students reside. So Meridian Middle School got an ASC program recommended. Mill Creek, again, change the boundary to let new middle school relieve Mill Creek of its capacity. Mill Creek's considered a high-impact school, which we already know that. Not a lot of students in the northern part, so we talked a little bit about that when we were talking about River Ridge. We cleaned cleaned Mill Creek up quite a bit, giving a lot of Mill Creek to not only the new middle school, but also to Meeker a little bit there, and bringing their capacity down. Mill Creek is by far, hands down, the largest middle school when it comes to student population. The most transient, the most diverse, the most demographically, I mean, you name it, it's Mill Creek. And so to be able to reduce the number of students that attend Mill Creek, to be able to create that space, as we've spoken before about our high-impact schools and about our transient population, as well as our more multifamily housing units that serve our Mill Creek Middle School. We needed to make those adjustments to be able to create that space. We also chose not to add an additional program to Mill Creek. One, we didn't want to push their capacity any higher because we know that that school will grow regardless. And so we need to make sure that we give them as much space as possible to be able to grow or just breathe for a couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, how do you do that? Like, it was already overflowing, and you add 6th graders.
So how we do that is that Mill Creek stands to lose 100 kids from where they're currently at right now by adding even a 6th grade class because we moved everybody east.
Okay.
That was the goal. And so that's what took a lot of time was how do we keep moving kids north and east? And so that's what we did.
Okay.
Our new middle school, we did the 1.75 miles, which is the walking boundary distance based on policy. Buffer around the new school as a starting point, and then we built the boundary from there. That's how we created that boundary. We included Scenic Hill to alleviate Mill Creek. We included the bottom of Meeker Middle School, that is, which I showed you that kind of loop down there, a little box that was sitting down there, which is a walking distance to the new middle school. We excluded the Birch Creek neighborhood, kept them with Cedar Heights and Kent Lake as they've requested. And then, as I stated, I fully believe that the new middle school will be a high-impact school based on demographics. I have no reason to believe otherwise. I was a principal while we had the previous Sequoia Middle School, so I know exactly the students that we serve here on the East Hill. So we wanted to be able to keep that under capacity as well. It did have some space, so we added an SC program to the new middle school as part of our increasing our educational programming for our students who reside in those areas. Northwood Middle School, again, we had space, all the space in the world. So we said, Scott, here you go. Here's a brand new boundary and a lot more kids for you. So we increased the capacity there at Northwood, followed parcel lines and cleaned those pieces up, but obviously made them much bigger. And you'll see in a slide, or you saw it already in a slide, that then Northwood doesn't all feed to Kent Ridge, that there is that divider line there right around. It's a little north of 224th that actually goes back down into Kentwood. So, because Kent Ridge is big, we made it big. High schools, here you go. Take a quick look at that. You've got what KM used to be in the purple, what Kent Ridge used to be in the yellow, what Kentwood used to be in the green, and then Kent Lake, which looks very similar to what they currently are, but there are some additions. So let's dig into that.
Before you
real
go
quick.
to the high
Yeah.
schools, can I ask?
Oh, middle school, yeah, sorry.
For the new middle school, and you were talking about the walking boundaries.
Yeah.
It seems like there's some very large streets in the middle of there, 516, 515. Are those all expected that those would still have students walking across them?
Yeah, so there are crosswalks, there are sidewalks, like identified sidewalks. There are spaces for crossing, whereas other parts of our district where there are large roads, there are not really, like think about Petrovisky. We bus across Petrovisky because you're gonna have to walk a mile to find a crosswalk.
Right.
If not, then you're gonna try to run across traffic no one drives 35 up there, so they're driving 55. And so this space, there are a lot more opportunities to be able to cross the street safely. Elementary, a little bit different than middle school, a little bit different than high school as far as their age and their ability to be able to travel safely to and from school, walking. So yes, we take those into consideration when building the walking boundaries of what is safe and what we don't consider safe. And Justin and his transportation team are really good at, even if they're in the walking boundary, this is just not a safe space, we're gonna put a bus over there. So it's important that everyone knows that it's not just like, well, too bad, that's the way it is.
I was just gonna say, I can speak on that, because I kind of helped create the boundary.
You wanna come up to the mic? Ella.
And when we did it, we did the 1.5 mile, 1 3/4 mile buffer, and we knew that all of that wasn't going to be walking, obviously, because there are big roads and if there's not sidewalks and everything. But that was just kind of our starting point, just because we had to start somewhere. So not all of it is walking, but Justin and I actually yesterday started going through and looking at the walking boundaries and what areas of the new middle school would be walking. And it was, I can't remember exactly, but it was over half of the students would be able to be walking. So just to kind of touch on that a little bit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah,
I have a concern about Meridian.
Meridian Middle,
Yeah.
that it's old.
Not only that it's
Not only
old, but it has a rather unique design to the building. And moving
can say that
sixth
about a lot of
graders
ours.
into that and trying to keep track of, are you where you're supposed to be, has always been a challenge. But it now strikes me, it's at 80% capacity, and don't they still have portables out there?
So I'm glad you brought that up, Director Clark. And I didn't say this up front, and I should have. It is stated later, but all of our capacity work is done based on not using and not including portables. Yes, Meridian Middle School, as well as almost every other school in this district, has portables on their property. Not all of them, but most of them do. This capacity is designed not to have kids in portable classrooms. Now, as I've also stated, and I'll keep stating, just in case I'm not 100% accurate because things happen, there is a chance that we may have to use portables for instruction. Now, it is not our goal, and we are doing everything we can. We believe these boundaries are going to get us the furthest away from accessing those. But to your point about Meridian, you're absolutely right. Walked that campus a million times. Yes, it creates its challenges. There's no doubt. We could probably have a conversation about every school in this district about how any one school can create a challenge for a teacher or administrator or a student to be able to make good choices about where they're at. Yeah. Other questions about middle school? Okay. High school is really quick, and then we're on the home stretch. I'm glad that you guys are asking questions as we're going. Kent Meridian, all high schools now have 4 programs. Most all of them, except for Kentwood, had 4 programs, or 4 inclusive ed programs. Excuse me. Kentwood's coming online now with they're the last school to add their 4th program. So I'll share that when we get there. But KM, another high impact school, school that has the smallest capacity in the entire of the high school fleet, yet for this year and last year has the largest enrollment. Why? For the broken record statement that I made over and over again, it serves that multifamily housing unit families. When I was at KM, we served 82% of all multifamily housing units in the entire school district. High school students came to KM. Well, you also know that depending on families and their career changes or what's going on in their family life, they turn over. People are leaving apartments and coming into apartments every single day. And so you're constantly enrolling and unenrolling students, and numbers are growing. And so we needed to reduce the capacity at KM and bring that down to a little bit more manageable level, because we know that 78 will probably not be there very long. And so we needed to create that space. Right now, KM's functioning just shy of 100%. And they've got 10 portables sitting in the back. And if you drive back there, I don't remember, maybe it was Director Margell that said, it looks like a concentration camp or something back there. Somebody said
I use those words, but I did say there was a lot of portables.
something, yeah. I mean, it was just all lined up. Sorry about that. I couldn't remember exactly what you said, but, and so this would allow, for the first time in many, 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 many years, for KM to have a much lower student enrollment. And so, Kent Lake, this has been a topic of much conversation, not only in our committee work, but also in the emails that I've been getting and the social media posts that I've been seeing for the last 4 days. So Kent Lake here, as you're looking at that, we followed the parcel boundaries. We balanced enrollment by adding a few neighborhoods into Kent Lake from other high school boundaries. The committee encouraged the KL boundary to follow the elementary school boundary lines, which is what I spoke to earlier. That's the Horizon Elementary Pine Tree piece. So we added the Lake Meridian Park, which is the piece there that runs to the north side of Kent Kangley, that you can see the little pop-ups, and then we cut up into there. That's the Horizon. So Horizon 100% will feed Cedar Heights and will feed Kent Lake. We also pushed a little bit into the south there, as you can see over to the Green River on the south side there, relieving some space, relieving from Kent Meridian. The piece in question, I'll just call it out now, that has been a topic that you guys have all seen several times, is the section on the north side of Highway 18. That boundary right there, as you can see, is just a little bit different than what it is currently. That's been that boundary for 12 years. Prior to that particular section went to Kentwood. And as you can see where Kentwood is located, that's probably not a surprise that they probably originally went to Kentwood. That was a conversation we had today. It was a conversation we had yesterday. It was a conversation we have on a fairly regular basis. And now, of course, we've got a lot of community input that's coming into that space as well. Again, our goal was to relieve our high-impact schools, balance enrollment across the district. If we know how our enrollment currently stands, Kent Lake is our smallest high school by enrollment by far. And we wanted to make sure that that is also our newest facility. We wanted to make sure that we could push more kids out there, because the developing that's taking place out there is not happening as quickly as I think we all thought when we built that thing 25 years ago. 25, sorry.
25. Yeah, don't forget it. We just celebrated.
So, yep. And so, and that's why I said we added some areas to Kent Lake to be able to increase that enrollment there. So I know there'll be more conversations over the next 3 weeks about that particular piece. Kent Ridge, largest capacity high school we have in the district. Capacity-wise, based on CBA language, based on the current contract language for KEA, every single classroom, if they held 30 kids in every classroom, could hold almost 3,000 students at Kent Lake. Wow. Not including portables.
Whoa.
Now, I would venture to say that every single teacher in Kent Ridge would say, you're absolutely out of your mind. There's no way we could hold 3,000 kids. If I was there, I'd say the same thing. But it is the largest. It has the most instructional spaces, the most bricks and mortar instructional spaces of any of our schools. So therefore, it has the space to be able to push more kids. So when we're thinking about KM and taking relief off KM, kids went to Kent Ridge. If you take a look at this, we moved across the valley and picked up the River Ridge elementary community on that West Hill. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, as some people are thinking, like, oh my gosh, are we really going to bus kids from the West Hill all the way to Kent Ridge? Well, you may not believe it or not. Well, if you would believe it if you go downtown anytime and try to get across the valley floor and get up the hill. Which way's faster? To go from River Ridge to KM or from River Ridge to Kent Ridge? River Ridge to Kent Ridge.
Yes.
To KM, I know that.
So there is a straight shot for our buses to be able to do that.
Yep.
And can get kids to Kent Ridge faster than they can get to KM. and Kent Ridge has space. And so, yes, River Ridge will go to Mill Creek, but Mill Creek will peel off and go to KM and to Kent Ridge in this model. So, Kentwood, follow the parcel boundary lines, and then add our neighborhoods at the bottom of the boundary along Lake Meridian to balance enrollment. The other thing we did that I already saw some posts on is we moved all the way across the East Hill. And we moved all the way across the East Hill to 167. Because we were looking for more students, because Kentwood, if you didn't know this, Kentwood is our second lowest school in population, and this year had more students off of our projected enrollment than any other school in the district, and double the second closest school to it. So Kentwood had space. KM doesn't have space. We had to be able to cut into that. And I know from just looking at it, it's hard to understand, but it'll work, and transportation will work with it as a recommendation. So, last few slides. Questions? High school questions, sorry. Okay.
It seems Kenwood is now all the way to 167. That
Is, yep. It is. Program changes real quick. Inclusive education. So I won't read all of these. This is a new slide. But when we worked on our equitable distribution of programs, we start looking at, and this one specifically is speaking to inclusive ed programs. So you're talking about your LINK program, you're talking about your early childhood special education preschool program, your ASC, ASC, SA, SC, which I've defined earlier. So those are what we're talking about. So we looked at our students and where they reside, and trying to make sure that they have an opportunity, if possible, to be able to get their educational services in their school. That was really the driving force behind the adjustments that were made for our programs. And again, like I said earlier, I'm super happy to announce that we've added additional programs throughout our district to be able to meet the needs of our students in those areas. So we are not literally driving all the way across the entire district to take kids from one program to another. And so, but again, these are recommendations. We know that for families and for staff that are in these spaces, any adjustments that have hit them in a way, we know that it's not as easy to digest, and we get that. So it's our job as committee members to help clarify, give justification, try to share the rationale around those specific concerns to help people kind of digest it a little bit more. And again, not everything is going to make everybody happy. We understand that, but we don't want anyone to not feel like they've been heard and that we haven't considered their questions. So this is a slide that's been in there before. We did adjust it. There was a statement in here before that was inaccurate, and I appreciate Ms. Cavins pointing that out. It used to say that there were no Carriage Crest SC students at the Carriage Crest SC program. That's not true. There were two. And the reason that came up, and I'll just share the rationale for the public and for the board, is that when we went through and put this together, we were looking at a couple things, but we were looking at our, how many students ride the bus? How many of our inclusive ed students ride the bus? Because a very large number, not all, made very clear, of our SC students and ASD students ride the bus to school. We transport them. What we missed was making sure that we accounted for every single student and didn't just assume that everyone was riding the bus. So the statement that was on here, we redacted and took off. There are two students at the Carriage Crest SC program. And so this kind of explains that they would be going to the Ridgewood program, as I explained a little bit earlier. And then this explains the rationale for where we added the programs, where the kids are in that, and where they'd be coming from or pulling from as you look at that. And that is a slide that has been in there since Friday. Odyssey, real quick. I know we can talk about this more. So, just to your point, obviously it's been stated that the Lake Youngs and Ridgewood Odyssey programs would be consolidated and moved to Glen Ridge. The rationale for that, first, before I share the rationale, our Odyssey program, as well as our SC programs, were kind of in concentrated areas. The SC programs were more in our high impact, lower socioeconomic status areas, and our Odyssey programs more in our affluent, higher economic programs, which equity-wise, it doesn't look good.
Yep.
So, for equity purposes, we said one Odyssey program per feeder strand. Because there was one in each of the other three, there were two in Kent Ridge. So we said we're going to consolidate and make them one. Okay? That way, there's no question. We don't have the staff to be able to add more programs in the other feeder schools, so we're going to bring that piece down to one. Parents said in a survey that they didn't want their kids on a bus for longer than 30 minutes. Okay, so we're taking that into consideration. We're taking into consideration that, and it states on the slide that we're pulling now from the River Ridge, West Hill area into Kent Ridge, which again, the Odyssey program for Kent Ridge would be housed at Glen Ridge. It's currently housed at River Ridge or Ridgewood and Lake Youngs. And so what's happening is that our demographic for our Kent Ridge Odyssey programs at the elementary level are lacking in diversity a lot.
Yep.
And so part of the rationale for moving this to Glen Ridge, it's a much more diverse school than Lake Youngs and Ridgewood is, or are. It is a lot closer for our River Ridge families to come across the valley to get to Glen Ridge than it is to drive all the way up to Ridgewood. So we're thinking about our underrepresented populations more than we're thinking about our more affluent populations, because going from Ridgewood to Glen Ridge is nothing like going from Ridgewood to, or River Ridge to Ridgewood. So that was a piece too. That and part of our consolidated program review that we do every year or every other year in the district, there was an expectation that our high cap programs need to increase the equitable identification and provision for access and opportunity to our underserved and underrepresented students in our high cap programs. So, to be able to make all these things work, we needed to be able to get a program a little bit closer to those students that actually represent the demographic that we are underrepresented in our high cap programs. Glen Ridge had space. We recommend that we're moving the high cap, our Odyssey program, to Glen Ridge, consolidating both Lake Youngs and Ridgewood. Now, to the numbers question, I know that's not going to sit well, but I can tell you right now, of the students that are moving to Glen Ridge on the Lake Youngs side of the house, of the 44 Lake Youngs kids that are 3rd and 4th grade that would be moving to Glen Ridge, only 13 of them are actually Lake Youngs residing students. The rest of them are bused in from other areas. Now, that is different than the Ridgewood Odyssey program. That program, there are 37 students at Ridgewood in the 3rd and 4th grade, and 80% of them actually reside in the Ridgewood boundary area. So that impact is much greater because we would be busing all those kids to Glen Ridge. But again, the justification and the rationale really is more about creating an opportunity for our students that are underrepresented to have more access to a school that is closer to them, as well as being in a diverse school to encourage and engage students that are that have been less likely had opportunities to be able to engage in a program like that.
Can I pause really quick and
Yep.
ask, because it's almost 7, I think special meetings, we have a hard stop at 7, is that correct? So I want to make sure that we get, in our last 2 minutes, any questions or any final things you want to say before we have a hard stop at 7?
Yeah, so the last ones have already been new slides, so you're good there. The next steps was just letting everyone know that we've got the boundary listing sessions. The November 9th is the resolution, so 3 weeks from now. I want to make sure everyone understands that. We do have a robust district-wide communication plan that will begin the day after that vote, whatever we vote on. And then we'll continue with meaningful two-way communications throughout January through August, supporting all of our families, especially those that English is not their first language. We'll be talking about, we're talking about grandfathering right now, what that looks like. If we are grandfathering, say, seniors that are impacted by this adjustment, or anybody else for that matter, we're also talking about the transfer process. So those are conversations that are also happening kind of side by side with this. So we've got a lot of work to do before February, which is our secondary student registration, and everyone needs to know where they're going to school at. So if you have any questions, there's the boundary email, there's my email, which I put everywhere. I encourage board members, community members, committee members, anybody who would like to join for conversations at these spaces over the next 2 weeks. Would love to have you in attendance. And if you're not able to join, I just appreciate you continuing to ask questions. Because that's how we're working through these pieces. That's how we're viewing perspective in different ways and hearing everyone's voices. So please don't be silent. Continue to share what you hear and what you know and what you feel. So.
And if I can, I'd like to again thank all of the committee members for your dedication to try and work through this very complex and process.
Yes. I want to thank community members and Dr. Behringer, Mr. Buzzard, and Ella for all your hard work on this. So we appreciate everything, and we look forward to seeing this resolution on November 9th. And looking at 7 o'clock, thank you all for joining, and that concludes our meeting.